Alright, so this is gonna be episode 6 of Team Profiles for Set G. This team is gonna be about Kommo-o Scrafty. So, yeah, right. So, Kommo is a Pokemon that saw a lot of play in Set H, um, in a variety of styles, whether it been Iron Defense Body Press or Terrifier with a Flamethrower, and Clanger Soul with a Throat Spray. Um, Besides that, those were more just variations people were testing out, and they didn't really get any traction, right? Um, and it's generally just because they were just kind of, I would say, sort of mediocre variants for more that weren't really born out of a um desire to bring a Komodo variant into the mix, right? It didn't make Archelodon any more intimidated to be played, right? Komodo generally just sort of had its time in the sun, and then it kind of just faded off, right? And so inside it we haven't really been seeing a lot of Komodo, and so this is gonna help alleviate that a little bit. So hope you enjoy. Um, so yeah, Komodo was introduced in Generation 7 as a pseudo-legendary. Um, I feel like it was an improvement to the kind of mid-rangey nature of pseudo-legendaries that we've been seeing. And so I really liked Komodo when it came out. Um, and Komodo's style really hasn't changed since it's come out, right? The design of Komodo is generally, if you're gonna run it physical, you're gonna run it more defensively, and if you're gonna run it special, you're gonna run it more offensively, right? So that's generally what you're trying to go for with Komodo. Since it's generally its special moves are more better offensively, right? And then its physical moves are more for coverage or for sustain, right? So this is gonna be a special Komodo, so kind of just to spoil that a little bit. But yeah. Um when you came out in Kommo Gen 7, you had like Z moves and stuff like that. And being the pseudo legendary for the generation, they gave us own Z move. Um I don't even know what it was. I think it's called Kommo Z or something like that. But yeah. Um I gave it the move Clanger Soul Base, which I do. Um and it was basically just, Clanger Soul. Um Except you got it from using clanging skills. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So Gen 7 was generally a generation of, it was basically like, um, basically in Gen 7, what they were trying to do was they were trying to really make it a game. What they were trying to improve on the concept of um gems, right? Because gems came out, right, and you know, they didn't really see much play generally. That was old school Pokemon, so you didn't really see a lot of. We don't really have a lot of concepts preserved from Black and White, but gems were not something that were generally explored that much, right? So I guess Z moves were an improvement on that. Um, so that's kind of where they're trying to go for, I believe, right? But So since then, Kommo hasn't really got an identity shift in any way, shape, or form, and so right, same old Kommo, right? So Kommo, like I said, right, if it's physical, it's defensive, and if it's special, it's offensive, right? So being the mid-range Pokemon that it is, um, it's gonna need a lot of support to compensate for, you know, its lack of stats in some areas, right? And Kommo is different because Kommo is kind of like Excalibur. You watch my Excalibur. What team was it? I think it was Excalibur and the Crozma. Um, yeah. Um, Kind of similar to Excalibur in that Excalibur, just like Excalibur, Kommo doesn't need um uh doesn't need a lot of support to compensate for stuff like speed and stuff like that. Kommo does a lot of things by itself, right? And so as a result, you can get yourself a lot of uh, Pokemon inside it that can do a lot more things than just compensate for its stat loss, right? So Kommo, right, has its attack, Clanger's Soul, right? What it does is it's basically an Omni Boost, what we call it in the VGC, um, where um, it increases all your stats by stage, and the drawback is that you lose a third of your HP, right? So generally, the premier Omni Boost move is Ancient Power. The difference between Ancient Power and Clanger Soul is that Ancient Power has a 10% chance to trigger, and it does damage, right? It's a special move, and then Clanger Soul is just a status move that does it automatically, right? And so yeah, it's a very powerful effect because being able to just set up power Pokemon on the board that can just Omni Boost itself, and if you don't respect it, then it can just take over your game. It's very powerful, right? So yeah, and counterpart to Clanger Soul is Clanger Skills, right? 110 special attack, um, Dragon special attack, um, and when you use it, your defense gets lowered by one stage, right? So these two moves should be played together, right? They gave it Clanger Soul so that you can use Clanger skills and not have the drawback, right? So that's generally what it is, right? And it's also just because Kommo has only 100 special attack, right? And so if this is a Pokemon that's supposed to be devastating people's boards, right? If it only has 110 special, if it only has 110 base powers, um, 110 base power dragon move, then it's not going to be able to um like knock out Pokemon that it should be knocking out, right? And so to compensate for that, you know, um, you have um, Clanger Soul to boost your special attack, right? So yeah, these moves should be played together, right? So yeah, if it seems like Clanger Soul is just an incredibly powerful move, but it doesn't make any sense, like um, yeah, it's because it's supposed to be played in conjunction with Clanger's skills, right? So yeah, um, so you have a lot of like inherent power, and you have a lot of inherent bulk, and then you have a lot of inherent, tempo. So it's not something where, oh gosh, this Pokemon is just like, why isn't this Pokemon good, right? And then you can come up with all these excuses like, oh, it's because of its typing, oh, it's because it only has 85 speed. No, right? It's a mid-range Pokemon. It's not a carry, right? So you're not supposed to get just a one-shot clanging skills right off the jump, right? So these throw to trade concepts, I don't really like them because that's really not Kommo's style. Kommo is not supposed to be playing this cheesy game like uh like Calyrex Shadow Rider, where you just come on and you have like 150 base speed, and then you just press Astral Barrage twice and you win, right? Because you're supposed to be playing a very long, sophisticated game with this Pokemon, right? So yeah, I hope that clears up any confusion, right? And so, yeah, so that's Kommo-o, right? And then, so the variant I'm playing Kommo-o with is I'm playing with Scrafty, right? So, um, Scarfty is Dark Rider Pokemon. Came out in Gen 5. When it came out with a lot of hype, right? Because first of all, its design, right? Its sprite design is very appealing, right? It's very left field for Pokemon, right? Pokemon being like a kids game, marketed as a kids game rather. Um, to have this kind of like ruffian style Pokemon, enter their archive, right, is very interesting, right? And it got a lot of play, right? And rightfully so, right? Because it's dark fighting, and in Gen 5, there was no fairy type, right? And Steel also didn't resist dark, and so um, this Pokemon didn't have any Pokemon that resisted it, right? So it had a typing that couldn't be resisted, right? And so in singles, I think it was like OU for not too long, right? If you're talking about like Smolgan ladders, it was OU for like a pretty decent amount of time, right? And so yeah, the next generation, no surprise, they made Steel. Um, sorry, Steel did resist Dark. That's what I meant to say. Steel did resist Dark. And so to be able to combo with Fighting type meant that there was no Steel Pokemon um, that could wall Scarfty. That's what I meant. And then in Gen 6, they removed Steel's resistance to Dark, and then um, they brought in the Fairy type, which walls both these types, right? So then got balanced, right? So yeah, but still, Scrafty is still a pretty devastating Pokemon, right? So kind of go over its design a little bit. So Scrafty is dark fighting, and like I said, and when it came out, no type resisted dark fighting, right? No type combination resisted dark fighting. Um, and it had very good style line, like 115 defenses. Both its defenses are 115, and then it had like 90 or 95 attack, right? Then it had very high base power attacks like payback, right, and high jump kick. And so then it had 58 speed, so that it was probably gonna get the paybacks off at max power anytime you used it, right? So yeah, it may seem like the Pokemon was underwhelming, but um, it was like if you understood kind of, you would just see you if you understood like kind of Scrafty's overall stat line, you'd see that as completely ridiculous because Scarfty doesn't need like 100 speed. You know what I mean? In fact, if it had more speed, it would be worse, actually, right? For all the reasons I just mentioned, right? And so yeah, so this one has an assault vest, right? And it's poison terra, um, and it has knockoff, drain punch, poison jab, and fake out, right? So yeah, you have three stab moves effectively, and you have your fake out, right, with a very good VGC move. It's adamant nature, 252 attack, 132 HP, 124 special defense, and that's supposed to have intimidate. I haven't played this team yet, but yeah, it's supposed to have intimidate. Um, and so yeah, um, so yeah, as an assault vest and as intimidate, right? So now you have effectively 50% boost in your defense and 50% boost in your special defense, right? So yeah, um, so this is the core of the team, like the leads that you're generally going to want to lead with, right? And so the idea is, of course, right, in situations where um, you're gonna get let off against. Oh yeah, and Kommo is 352 special attack, modest nature, 132 HP, 124 special defense with overcoat. So yeah, And yeah, Overcoat is generally just, I think it's the more superior of its three abilities. Its three abilities are pretty good, but they're just generally situational abilities. But the situation just happens to be that Overcoat is the best of the three in this format, right? So yeah. You're generally the idea is gonna be like in situations where you're leading off against you know, something like an Amoonguss or an Incineroar, and then a carry or like a very strong mid-range Pokemon beside it. You're gonna be able to set up a situation where you can go like fake out into the carry slot, and then you can go Clanger Soul. Right, that's generally how you're gonna want to start your game off. Right, and don't see this as like a checkmate or some sort of cheese. This is just a combo that you want to lead off with optimally, so that you can get your game going, right? Because that doesn't mean checkmate, right? Again, right? Um, Kommo-o isn't, you know, doesn't have like 150 base speed, right? It's not going to be able to outspeed every single Pokemon on the board. It's generally only going to get off a single Klinger Soul, right? And so you're going to have to play around that Klinger Soul, and that's ultimately how you're going to play the game, right? And not only that, right? Considering the fact that uh, a single type in just walls this whole um type in, right? Fairy just walls Dragon fighting, right? It's not gonna be where you're just gonna be able to just go Clanger Soul and just win, right? You're gonna have to play the game, right? And that's kind of the message that Pokemon is lacking, is that you don't have to just play Miraidon and just press Volt Switch out of a bad matchup and one shot a Pokemon. You know what I mean? Um, you don't have to, go Tailwind, Water Tear, Water Spout in Kyogre, right? Like that's not Pokemon. In fact, that's no game. No game outside of Pokemon does that, right? Because considering Pokemon is an RPG, right? You can't name another RPG, competitive RPG, right? Where your opponent just doesn't get to play the game, right? There is a sense of competitiveness between yourself and um yourself and your opponent, right? That Pokemon just is completely absent in the Pokemon community right now, right? So yeah, right. And obviously, I'm not trying to say that is everybody, right? Like it's just generally, you know, Pokemon's in the infancy, and people rumors go around, that you can play this, and people, in their ignorance, really just kind of just graft onto them, pretty much, right? And so, yeah, it's like, you can play, Scarf Kyogre in the rain with, Water Terror, and you can just one shot everything, right? And that's not Pokemon, right? That's just cheese, right? And cheese is in every game, and cheese gets outed, right? So yeah, um, yeah, don't think of this as some checkmate. This is just kind of a combo to set up Clanger Soul, right? So yeah, not to get too much into that. To finish off the explanation on this Kommo, right, has leftovers, right? Because you're going to be using Clanger Soul generally, and because it's a mid-range Pokemon, you're going to get a lot of value out of leftovers. It's going to be uh not a lot of moves that are going to be able to two-shot you. So yeah, you're going to get a lot of value out of leftovers, right? And then it's normal Terra, right? With Boom Burst. So you got a normal Terra Boom Burst, and you have a very neutral type in to Terra into. So this is going to be your go-to Terra Pokemon for the team, right? So yeah, you got the Clanger Scale spread, you got the Boom Burst spread, right? And yeah, you got yourself a good time, right? So yeah, um, yeah. So then you got the Scarfty, right? And then you have your third core slot, which is Alola Ninetales, right? This is a Focus Sash, Ice Terra, uh, Alola Ninetales. Um, so it's special attack speed. right? Timid nature, and this is a speed control, you know, alone on nine tails, right? That's generally the slot at 4, right? So the idea is that, against, like, missing walls, Kommo-o walls, water and fire moves, but if you're up against something like a Koraidon, right, and it doesn't have a dragon move, right, if it's in the sun and it presses collision course, it's gonna hurt, right? You don't have any defense investments, and so stuff like that, right, where or like photosynthesis against like a raging bolt, something like that. Yeah, you're gonna need ways to outweather, right? So, to compensate for not having a not having something on your team to outweather, like a Terapagos or like an airlock, then yeah, play Ninetales, right? And I feel like this is the role that Snow um is gonna play in VGC. It's gonna be just a neutral way to outweather generally. So I feel like Pokemon is kind of prepping Alolan Ninetales to be like the premier sort of um core slot support, basically, right? So yeah, um, yeah. So it has Icy Wind, Aurora Veil, Freeze Dry, Moonblast, right? So yeah, again, this team doesn't really have a lot of coverage moves, right? And so Freeze Dry is so you can hit water Pokemon, right? And then yeah, then you have Icy Wind, moves you're generally going to be using, and then Moonblast, right? Nice strong stat move. Um, and then Aurora Veil, right? So Ninetales has a generally good speed, right? But for Pokemon that are going to outspeed it, um, or that want to try to knock it down before it gets set up, right? You can have the Sash, right? And you basically get guaranteed Aurora Veil, right? Because it's going to be very unlikely to have two Pokemon on the board that are going to be able to outspeed Ninetales, right? So generally with the Focus Sash, you get yourself an Aurora Veil, right? So yeah, that's the third slot, and then you got your restricted slot, right? So White Kyurem is a Fire Terror White Kyurem with Life Orb, right? And it's modest nature, 252 special attack, 132 HP, 124 special defense, right? And so, yeah, the idea is so you have Earth Power, Fusion Flare, Blizzard Draco Meteor, right? So you can have your Ice slot be a Blizzard since their core is Ninetales, right? And then you can invest uh half into special defense. Since you have Snow up, right? Your defense is going to be 50% higher, right? So it gives you a good spread, right? And Kyurem being a mid-range Pokemon, um, definitely more towards the mid-range carry side, um, is you know, gonna need things to compensate for its lack of stats, right? And so yeah, you have the snow, right? So it's just a good time to put in Kyurem since you have the snow, and you have you can just put the rest into special defense, right? Give yourself a good spread in special defense and speed, right? And you can see it actually adds up, right? Because with the snow boost, you get about 221 roughly um defense, right? Um and so yeah, right? 221 defense, 191 special defense, right? That's a pretty good spread out, right? This is obviously I think this is level 71, right? But yeah, you get the idea, right? You're generally going to have a good amount of defense and a good amount of special defense, right? So yeah. Um, yeah, so again, Kyurem is kind of one of those legendaries that's designed to just be able to just destroy a slot, right? And especially being an ice type, you get access to Stab Blizzard, right? This thing is extra powerful, right? So yeah, Kyurem was Ice Rider Calyrex before Ice Rider Calyrex was Ice Rider Calyrex, right? So yeah, so that's the core of the team, right? And then the pivot slots, you got Talonflame, Clear Amulet, Flying Terror, right? This is Adamant Nature. It's got 252 attack, 252 speed, and it's got Flare Blitz, Dual Wing Bleat, Tailwind, and Default, right? So again, right, another way to um, amplify speed, and you can out terrain, right? Priority terrain out, right? So especially in a team with no resistances to Psychic except for Scarfty, which has an immunity. Being able to out something like a Psychic terrain with priority is very good because um, you can you can prioritize removing the terrain so that they can't go for like an expanded force cheese, right? And then you have Flying Terror, Dual Wing Beat, right? So to compensate for the fact that you're using Dual Wing Beat instead of something like Brave Bird, right? Um, gives you the ability to one shot like a Focus Sash Urshifu, for example, right? So yeah, and then the other slot is Araquanid. This is Covert Cloak Araquanid Bugterra. Um, has 252 HP, 132 attack, 124 special defense, Adamant Nature, and so has Water Bubble, right? And has Liquidation, Leech Life, Wide Guard, Sticky Web, right? So again, right? So this is like your slot dedicated to like out in fire Pokemon, which you don't really have a good matchup into for this team, right? So generally, the fire Pokemon you're just going to be running to are like Incineroar. Yeah, generally it's Incineroar, right? So uh yeah, this is just so that you can pressure Incineroars, right? If they want to lead Incineroar, right? You can if they have an Incineroar on your team and you know that they don't really have good leads, then you can just lead with Araquanid, and you have a lead Araquanid since it has stuff like Sticky Web, and it gives you options into the Ice Ride, the Calyrexes, right? So that yeah, they can't just go for like a helping hand, um, Astral Barrage, for example. Um, Liquidation is probably gonna one shot in the Incineroar unless it's in the sun or something like that. And yeah, right. So and then it's just another speed control option, right? So yeah, I feel like this is actually probably one of the stronger pseudo-legendary mid-range teams, right? For the format, generally due to um, it's not needing to have to compensate too much, right? As opposed to other pseudo-legendaries, like for example, uh, Excalibur, right? Which generally just needs snow, right? And so yeah, I feel like yeah, it's very ironic that Kommo is probably the least played pseudo legendary in Set G, and it's probably higher up on the tier list than most pseudo legendaries, right? Especially like Arcaluna for sure, right? So yeah, so this is Kommo-o Scrafty, right? Yeah, and I've said a lot about it in this video, so I'm not gonna, wrap up too much with too much. But yeah, feel free to configure the pivot slots, um, configure some of the terror types, and some of the extra slots like Boom Burst, Drain Punch, right? And um, yeah, if you like this team, feel free to try it out, make it yourself, Um, and yeah, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next video.